Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Mr. President, what about Michael Cohen? Are you considering a
Thank you very much. Stupid question.
Stupid question. That's President Trump downplaying the questions today about whether he'd pardon Michael Cohen. Our reporting tonight, though, adds some intrigue. Cohen encouraged by Trump's tweets as a sign to stay strong. That's courtesy of Vanity Fair. And even if no pardon's being discussed formally, he thinks these are messages that Trump is still watching out for him. But why should Trump be worried at all? That brings us to a special report tonight. How some people in Trump land could have wider criminal liability than they realize and a major tool in Mueller's pocket. The law that I'm talking about is something everyone knows, at least in general, bribery. But here's what's key. While traditionally government bribery sounds like something only government officials can do, something that's only an issue after someone takes office, like Trump in January, there are now indications that Mueller could get tougher and reach back farther than that. Take former federal prosecutor Seth Waxman, who argues there's a way that federal bribery laws actually can apply the moment a candidate becomes the party's nominee. Seth is my special guest tonight to dig into what he calls an arrow in Mueller's quiver. Now, bribery does not always go down like it does in the movies. It's not always a suitcase full of cash. In fact, when you're buying off a public official, the law says a bribe can be anything of value. And bribery is a weapon federal prosecutors can use. In fact, during his time running the FBI, Bob Mueller ramped up the number of public corruption cases they investigated, and he knows as well as anyone that Trump became a public official under the law not when he won and was sworn in, but rather 6 months earlier, the day he stood on that stage in Cleveland and accepted the Republican nomination for president.
Nobody knows the system better than me. I have seen firsthand how the system is rigged.
The time gap between the nomination and the oath is important. Consider that the DNC emails came out during that time, that Donald Trump Jr. was in touch with WikiLeaks then, that Roger Stone first claimed he was talking to Guccifer 2.0 then. And this law is designed to deal with exactly potentially that kind of preemptive action if it becomes a bribe, which is why it says, quote, any person who's been nominated or appointed to be a public official can be prosecuted under that 1962 bribery law. Seth Waxman is here as well as Nick Ackerman. Seth, why is this important?
Well, Ari, I think this could be a game changer when it comes to federal prosecutions. I mean, the federal bribery charge has a 15-year criminal penalty, a jail term associated with it. Federal prosecutors use that kind of tool to go after senior members of a conspiracy and try to roll them up onto the leadership of that conspiracy. And I think the reason we haven't been discussing this law up until now is because you have to kind of dig into the federal bribery statute. In fact, look at the definition section, not to get too legally geeky here.
Let's do it.
Well, let's do it. And when you look at that, you realize, as you pointed out, that the law does not just begin to apply when the public official is sworn into office, as Mr. Trump was in January of 2017, but rather backs all the way up to July of 2016 when he was nominated.
So if someone, say a foreign agent, wants to bribe someone for what they would do if or after elected, you're saying that bribe, quote unquote, can take place during the campaign?
Right, and that's why the law was structured the way it was back in 1962. This Congress realized that public officials aren't susceptible to bribes just once they get into office. If someone's kind of in the pipeline to take a serious office, no more serious office than the President of the United States, we want to protect against that kind of corruption, and so they made the law apply as of the date of the nomination, which in this case puts it directly into the heart of where Bob Mueller and his team are looking at with all these various interactions between the Russian team on the one side and the Trump team on the other.
Nick, what do you think of Seth's eagle eyes here?
I think he's absolutely correct. I think what the quid pro quo is here is the dropping of sanctions in return for the Russians helping on the campaign. What the Russians wanted worse than anything was to get from under the sanctions that were imposed by Obama with respect to the invasion of the Ukraine and also to the sanctions that were levied later with respect to the interference in the election.
So if the Russians get the sanctions, under your theory, what did the Trump campaign get?
They get the help. They get the help in getting elected. They get the emails that are stolen from the DNC. They get the Russians suppressing the Hillary Clinton vote by using Facebook and using Twitter and going after the Hillary Clinton voters and suppressing that vote.
So, Seth, is that a theory that you think has foundation and precedent?
I think that fits squarely in what a bribery case is typically all about, a quid pro quo. So it's the offering of dirt on Hillary Clinton in exchange for a promise to reduce sanctions. So anything that's that this for that kind of an exchange when it involves a public official is a classic bribery charge. And what's different about this charge than all the other charges that we've been talking about, whether it's federal election campaign law or Foreign Agent Registration Act, I will tell you as a former federal prosecutor, those are very rare prosecutions. On the other hand, a federal bribery charge kind of goes to the heart of what every federal prosecutor who's gone after public corruption uses as their primary weapon. And I can tell you, Bob Mueller and his team are very adept and very comfortable using that kind of charge and bringing a case under that law.
Right, and it was fascinating to read your analysis of this as a federal prosecutor yourself. I mean, you're not freelancing as a fantasy movie plot. You're talking about what you think there is a case for, and I know you've brought them in the past. Seth Waxman and Nick Ackerman, thank you both.
It is Wednesday, the 25th of April of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. That's right, folks. It's not what you fear. It really is just an egg dish with hollandaise. Unless you fear egg dishes with hollandaise. Okay, well, Ronnie Jackson, I don't know. Is he still in the running? Trump said, Ronnie, you can keep the job, but if you want to leave, you can, and probably Friday would be a good time to do that. And Ronnie said, well, why don't we drink on it? And Trump said, are you kidding me? I don't drink in public except when I'm at foreign state dinners and people are photographing me, but I figure the American press will never get it. Is Trump really a teetotaler? Because I've actually seen him hoist what looks to be not water in some of these foreign state dinners that he's attended, like in Asia and other places. Just saying. Poor Ronnie Jackson. I don't know why I feel sorry for him. Because I don't. Yeah, ran a hostile work environment. Apparently he's not a fun drunk, he's an angry drunk. If they were fun drunks like the drunks on MASH, because those were consummate doctors, surgeons. They were surgeons. Granted, they didn't drink before they went into surgery. But they were hungover all the time. So look. Now, if they were fun drunks like Hawkeye and well, his steady string of co-stars, then it would be okay. All right. But no, apparently he was a little peeved whenever he downed the minimum daily requirement so that he could just get his balance. Okay. He had to get his balance. All right. Well, It looks like Michael Cohen is still in the mix here, as well he should. And Manafort, the exposing of Manafort, we find out that the indictments that came down on him did not come from Mueller. So Trump, that crash course in American civics that the FSB had you go through, you know, the one that they have for Russian assets, dupes, and idiots. Well, they didn't get you everything, buddy. It's a little bit more complex than just firing the special counsel. It's not going to stop, okay? It's not going to stop. It is outside of the special counsel. And don't you just love how crooks say, no, you can't investigate me on these other crimes that I committed. You can only investigate me on the crime you think I committed. Only crooks come up with that. I mean, a citizen wouldn't. And a citizen doesn't, because a citizen is a citizen, you know? Well, I hope so. So Macron and his betrothed visited the White House for a state dinner here. First state dinner that Trump has given. And, of course, Trump tried to be the alpha gorilla and groom the virile young gorilla. And in the process, just showed that he really is, you know, the beta male to the alpha male, who is Macron. And, yeah. Oh, and what? Melania was wearing white before Memorial Day. How is that possible? I mean, doesn't she know that that's just not done in polite society? On the other hand, I've seen some of the other clothes that she hasn't worn. And the clothes look pretty good hanging up on, you know, the chair nearby. And so, well, that's our first lady. She did not want to hold hands with Donald Trump. And I don't blame her. I mean, as everybody's saying, she knows where that hand has been. Ew. Ew, ew, ew. The Waffle Town Massacre shooter initially got bond. Can you believe that? The guy got bond. Well, that was overturned by another judge because of a public outcry. Because it does make you wonder, you know? Here's a guy that went into a Waffle House with an AR-15, killed 4 people, you know, injured a bunch of others, ran away, okay? They find him in a wooded area, and they arrest him, and they probably stopped at Burger King to get a burger for him on the way to jail. They do that to the white mass killers, especially if the white mass killers kill some black people. Oh, you want a Burger King? Okay, we'll go there. On the way. Now, juxtapose that to Stephen Clark there in Sacramento, who supposedly was breaking windows of cars parked in the area. And they found him in his backyard holding a cell phone, and there was no hamburger offer there. No, that was shooting the guy a bunch of times in the back while he was on the ground, saying, okay, you can arrest me. So, oh, no, we don't do that with black people. That cell phone you're holding in your hand, that looks like a gun to me. You're dead. And he was. And they made sure of it. All right, what are we attending to today in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays? Well, of course, bribery. Bribery as a classic federal law is Mueller's trump card. R.A. Melber made us aware of that at the top, and thank you for having that panel. Well, on the rest of the menu, the NRA attacked James Shaw Jr. for only using his bare hands to stop the Waffle Town Massacre, instead of a high-capacity military-grade killing machine like a real hero would. He's a wimp. A new report from Betsy Devos' own Department of Education exposes the destructive racism in American schools that Betsy DeVos supports, and she tries to implement through policy, because that's the way she is. And Consumer Financial Protection Bureau Interim Director Mick Mulvaney told bankers that bribing more members of Congress will get them more access, and they can start with him. He'll take cash. Or you can put it away in his PayPal account. After the break, we'll move to the chef's table to examine how Scott Pruitt's new rule about what science the EPA can use could backfire spectacularly. Yep. You may not get what you want, Scott. And conservative lawyers melt down after the Oregon Bar Association condemns white nationalism in the Trump era. That's right. The conservative lawyers are upset that white nationalism is condemned. Okay, all that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. On the right-ish is the chat room link, and Kelly Lincoln, our roaring girl, monitors that. On the leftish from the chat room link are the contribute donate buttons, and we are unable to do this without you, and thank you for your generosity. Follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. We're on Facebook if you still feel like you want to go there. I know lots of members of my family still do, because I guess they don't know what's going on. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, and I do post a show notes and links diary on Daily Co's, and I'm on Daily Co's as Justice Putnam. Podcasts of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy can be found by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, YouTube, really practically everywhere. Okay, all right, this first article here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, is out of Share Blue Media by Oliver Willis. All right, well, the NRA TV complained that James Shaw Jr., the citizen who heroically stopped the Waffle House shooter, was unarmed and could not completely incapacitate the shooter. He's such a wimp. If he had a death machine, he would have been able to stop that shooter in his tracks. But instead, he cowered behind a door like the coward he is, and only took that hot, burning rifle out of the shooter's hands. And he would have beaten him over the head with it, but he's such a coward. He let him go. This is what NRA TV is saying. That he was not able to completely incapacitate him, so he... Are you effing kidding me? These people just cannot stop selling more guns no matter what. And everything is justified to use a gun. Well, they're blaming this hero for using his bare hands to take... And we're talking a white-hot rifle. It either got jammed or he had to reload. He'd let off a whole clip. He grabbed that gun out of the guy's hand, and NRA TV thinks that's not good enough. Next offering here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, is another article by Oliver Willis out of Share Blue Media. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos openly supports policy decisions that treat disciplinary bias against black students as if it were a myth. She's even gone so far as to say protections for minority students have made schools more violent. But a recently released report proves the racial bias is extremely real. In the midst of DeVos's attempted whitewashing, perhaps ironically, the Department DeVos heads is the source of the report. Looking at data from the 2015 to 2016 school year, the Department of Education found that while black students are 15% of the total population in American public schools, they make up 31% of the students who are arrested or referred to law enforcement. By comparison, white students are 49% of the student population and are 36% of those arrested or are referred to authorities. Now, I have heard it stated that these high numbers of black students being referred to the cops just proves how violent they really are. Not taking into consideration that was just an absolute racist statement. You know? Okay. Well, when you're crunching data and you're trying to manipulate it, you want people to believe that a whole population has a particular behavioral determinant that is wholly at odds with the way we in society really want to be. And look at the numbers, see? Well, the report also found disciplinary actions were more likely to take aim at black students. The data comes out as DeVos has been pushing to rescind guidance from the Obama administration that sought to prevent black students from being punished more severely than their white counterparts. DeVos' team has even taken to using the tragic shooting at Stoneman Douglas High as cover, going so far as to blame the Obama-era protections for making schools less safe. You know what makes schools less safe? Rampant racism and a society awash in guns. Gee. So let's blame the black guy. You know, oh God, these people. In a hearing last month, DeVos' indifference to racism in schools was slammed by Representative Barbara Lee, who is my former congressperson, and Barbara Lee will always speak for me, no matter where I live. And she had asked DeVos in June 2017 to address how school segregation might adversely affect minority students. But instead of answering Barbara Lee, DeVos' office went silent. In the hearing, DeVos appeared to suggest she would answer when Democrats in Congress rubber-stamped more of Trump's nominees. Lee responded to DeVos' attempt at evading responsibility, saying, "Madam Secretary, you just don't care much about civil rights of black and brown children." I told you, Barbara Lee speaks for me. DeVos has already succeeded in rolling back rules put in place by the hated Obama administration because they hate the black guy. They hated him from the very beginning. And they put everything in place to make an obstacle possible. And let's see, they want to roll back rules that enshrine protections for victims of sexual assault. And she's going after racial protections that now is in line with the Trump team's disregard for racial and gender equality. The initiative to roll back the Obama rule proves Lee's accusation is accurate, and the evidence shows that harm is being done, and Betsy DeVos does not care at all. Offering here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, is an article by Dominique Jackson out of Raw Story. Now, this is from a much larger article in the New York Times, and I was going to read it, but it's very long, and you can go look at it. But the gist of it is this. In a meeting with bank executives, Mick Mulvaney, interim director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, told them they should increase their campaign donations to have leverage over lawmakers. And this is from that New York Times article. We had a hierarchy in my office in Congress, Mulvaney said at the American Bankers Association conference in Washington. If you're a lobbyist who never gave us money, I didn't want to talk to you. If you're a lobbyist who gave us money, I might talk to you. Gee, don't you get how brazen they are now? How the normalcy that we grew up with, that bribery was wrong and bribing elected officials or government officials was the height of wrong? And now this is just doing business. We actually have laws that prevent our companies from bribing companies in other countries or taking bribes. And Mick Mulvaney just goes in front of the banks and says, bribe me, bribe Congress, and the more you give, the more access you get. And start with me. Start giving me some money. Now, Mulvaney's goal is to stop funding from independent entities such as the Federal Reserve. This action would give lawmakers influence on the Bureau's actions. He said the tactic was fundamental underpinnings of our representative democracy, and you have to continue to do it. If you came from back home and sat in my lobby, I talked to you without exception, regardless of the financial contributions. Sure. A spokesman for Mulvaney responded to a comment made by John Swartaki. He said he was making the point that hearing from people back home is vital to our democratic process. And the most important thing our representatives can do, it's more important than lobbyists and it's more important than money. No, it's never more important than money for these people. Well, maybe the power also, but I think it goes hand in hand. Money is the gradient in which they determine their power. Of course, Mulvaney also runs the White House Budget Office and has been a longtime critic of the Obama-era Consumer Bureau. In his role, he's already restricted the Bureau's access to bank data and hopes to take his initiatives further. Yeah, he's saying that, there's nothing in that data about the bank's possible criminal misdeeds that he sees as being criminal, because bribery now is a proper function of government, and it's just the way we do business. It's not personal. It's business. All right, let's get to our break, and we'll come back and go through weather from around the world, and then we'll finish up with those stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Jason Goldman. Add up every golf course, athletic field, industrial park, and yard in the U.S., and you have an area nearly the size of Florida. Upon first glance, all that lawn might seem a biological wasteland, a monoculture of grass. But while natural areas in the U.S. continue to decrease thanks to urbanization, urban green spaces, including lawns, could become more important reservoirs of biodiversity.
What happens if we mow our lawns less? Do we get more lawn flowers? And if we get more lawn flowers, can we get more bees? U.S.
Forest Service ecologist Susanna B. Lerman. She and her colleagues devised an experiment to see if front lawns could, in theory, provide decent habitat for bees, and if so, how to do it. So they recruited 16 homeowners from a Massachusetts suburb and monitored for flowers and bees throughout the summer for 2 years. Each of the homeowners agreed not to use any kind of pesticide or herbicide, and none had cultivated any sort of pollinator or vegetable garden that could skew the results. Some of the lawns were mowed weekly, some every other week, and others were mowed every 3 weeks.
When we mowed the lawns less, we got more flowers, so roughly 2.5 times more. But it was the yards that got mowed every 2 weeks that actually had the most bees.
No surprise, flowers were most abundant on the lawns mowed least often. But why do bees like a bit more frequent mowing? Lerman thinks it's because most of the bees she found were tiny native sweat bees, roughly the size of a grain of rice. Critters that small could find it difficult to navigate through taller grasses. In all, the researchers found 111 types of bees over the course of the study. That represents a quarter of all bee species known to occur in Massachusetts.
When you get down on your hands and knees, there's a lot going on in these lawns.
So not only do lawns hold more biodiversity than it might seem, but it turns out that one way to manage them for wildlife is to be lazy, but not too lazy.
A lot of people have been telling me that they feel vindicated now, that they have a reason to tell their neighbors why they're not mowing. It's for the bees. By mowing your lawns every 2 weeks or so, you're letting these flowers grow and bloom, and they seem to be having a positive impact for bees.
For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Jason Goldman.
This is 60 Second Civics from the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. Slavery was not confined to the South. It was well entrenched in the North. New York and New Jersey retained significant slave populations. Even in the late 1790s, 1 in 5 New York City households kept domestic slaves, while slaves worked on the farms on many Hudson River estates, along with white tenant farmers. Northern founders and framers were no less conflicted about slavery, although some took a more active role in trying to end it. Benjamin Franklin began, as early as 1729, printing Quaker tracts against slavery and the slave trade. In his later years, Franklin became a courageous, outspoken president of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. Nonetheless, as biographer Edmund Morgan has noted, not until late in life did it, slavery, begin to trouble his conscience. John Adams never owned a slave. He denounced slavery as a foul contagion in the human character. Even so, Adams did not always translate his beliefs into practice. As a lawyer, he occasionally defended slaves, but as a politician, he made no effort to loosen the shackles of those in bondage. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
The Koch brothers believe that their great wealth entitles them to rule over the many. So, for decades, they've been running a surreptitious assault on the rules that protect the majority of us from their abuse. From whacking our voting rights to busting unions, their plutocratic intent is nothing less than to pull a coup on democracy, installing a government of, by, and for the super-rich. They've enlisted a secretive cadre of other billionaires who share their extreme kleptocratic belief that 1, property rights of the rich are more important than the people's political rights. 2, that majority rule is not a good form of governing. And 3, that the makers, as the billionaires dubbed themselves, should be able to overrule collective actions of the lower classes, whom they call takers. They've created a complex, sophisticated web of right-wing front groups that have already corporatized a slew of our most basic laws and institutions. And they've gained a chokehold on nearly every level of government, including our courts and whole states like Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Texas. To carry out their attacks, they've essentially taken over the Republican Party. Even more shocking than the arrogance of this unprecedented power grab by the conspiracy of billionaires is its quiet success. The Koch coup crept up on us because it abhorred publicity and couched each move as an independent effort by a separate group. Then, the conspirators backed the Supreme Court's outrageous 2010 Citizens United decision, decreeing that unlimited corporate spending is allowed because it's, quote, free speech. Only then did Americans begin waking up to the reality that the Kochs were making an assault on democracy itself. This is Jim Hightower saying, to learn more, check out the extensive Koch web files at the Center for Media and Democracy at exposedbycmd.org/Koch.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day 1,800 auto workers sat down at the Ford Motor Plant in Richmond, California. It was the largest Ford plant on the West Coast. The UAW organizing drive at Ford had just begun a few weeks earlier with a sit-down strike in Kansas City. Company manager Clarence Bullwinkle reported he had returned from lunch only to find the plant occupied and all the power shut off. Workers began their occupation after 12 workers with seniority rights had been transferred from the assembly plant to the loading department and then discharged. Strikers voted to allow company officials and office workers to leave the plant but not return. Bullwinkle was told to get out and stay out until you meet our demands. He refused to budge and holed up in his office. Demands included recognition of the union, seniority rights, and regular pay instead of discharge for workers who are out sick or injured on duty. As the night shift arrived and then left, they passed their lunch buckets in solidarity to the striking workers. Within 12 hours, the strike was reportedly called off after Ford officials agreed to meet with strikers. Seeing this as tantamount to winning union recognition, workers paraded through the streets in the early hours of Saturday morning. But they hit the picket lines later that day when Ford officials failed to appear. By Monday, they were right back on the job. Fearing another day's loss of production, Ford officials met with union leaders. While workers did not win formal recognition, they did win seniority rights and recognition of the Shop Stewards Committee in a first step toward union recognition, which would come 4 years later. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labor.
This is a Radio Labor report recorded on Tuesday, April 24th, 2018. I'm Mark Belanger. Perhaps the countries most endangered by climate change are small island states. The difficulties for these countries are exacerbated because of their small geographical area, isolation, and exposure. They suffer effects such as rising sea levels, altered rain patterns, and storm surges. Because these factors can have significant effects on employment, labor unions are often at the forefront of climate change responses. To find out how small island states are coping with climate change, I talked to Toni Moore. Ms. Moore is the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union. Barbados is part of the Caribbean region of small islands. I asked Ms. Moore how her country, Barbados, and the rest of the Caribbean are confronting climate change.
Certainly, building the resilience of small and vulnerable states to deal with the effects of climate change is a priority for Barbados and our neighboring countries, because it has to be a priority for our countries. Barbados and other countries in the region are very susceptible because what we have been experiencing over time is increases in the sea level, a rising sea level. Of course, we are exposed to increases in storm surge levels, and with climate change, we have also been experiencing changes in our rainfall patterns. So climate change has its importance to us, is of a high priority to us, because a number of our countries depend on tourism, and those countries that aren't heavily dependent on tourism are heavily dependent on agriculture. And as you would imagine, the erosion of our coasts and the changes in the rainfall patterns and the severe weather events, all of these can combine or even individually offset our tourism product and offset our agricultural base. So we have been particularly concerned, what can we do what can be done, even if we can't do it, to make sure we can offset these rapid negative occurrences so that they don't trigger bigger problems for us.
What can labor unions, especially in small countries like Barbados, do to help meet the challenges of climate change?
As it relates to what can trade unions do, it is what a number of trade unions have been doing, and certainly our own trade union. We have been focusing on worker education, using this as part of our curriculum for workers, because each citizen has to be able to see the negative impacts as they are, because it is so easy for people to become preoccupied with the fact that the trade union should be about salary increases and should be about conditions at work. But the trade union movement has to be concerned with improving the general quality of life for people. And that speaks to an objective of our sustainability. And so we have been focusing on the issue of climate change in our programs at our Labor College. When we meet at our annual delegates conferences, speaking on these issues, speaking to these broad issues, sensitizing our workers, having their feedback so that as we prepare to make resolutions or advocacy in one form or next to our government, that we are in a position to do that.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. As French President Emmanuel Macron meets with President Trump at the White House today, it's expected the future of the Iran nuclear deal will be front and center in their discussion. Trump faces a May 12th deadline to decide whether to reimpose sanctions on Iran, and if he does, the landmark 2015 nuclear deal would effectively fall apart. Macron wants to prevent that from happening, and there's some talk the U.S. and the deal's European signatories could ink a follow-on deal that places more demands on Iran before offering further sanctions relief. But China and Russia are taking a different approach, trying to apply peer pressure on Trump by circulating a UN resolution supporting the Iran deal as it currently stands. On Tuesday, Russia's top arms control expert, Vladimir Yermakov, asked UN members to take serious steps to preserve the JCPOA, as the Iran deal is known, instead of merely hoping the deal survives. Yermakov said showing global support for the Iran deal is critical as the U.S. tries to persuade North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons. And speaking of the Iran deal, Iran is threatening to leave the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, should the U.S. withdraw from the nuclear deal. Those remarks on Tuesday by Iran's top national security official come as countries meet to try and reinvigorate the nearly 50-year-old treaty. The NPT obliges non-nuclear countries like Iran to refrain from building or acquiring nuclear weapons, but also obliges the U.S. and other nuclear states to pursue good faith efforts to eliminate their nuclear stockpiles. The State Department said last year the U.S. is living up to that commitment, though critics charge that between pursuing a nuclear weapons modernization plan, threatening to end the Iran deal, and showing little interest in renewing disarmament talks with Russia, that the U.S. under President Trump is violating the spirit of the agreement. Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays is our daily special. And while we're at the chef's table, we always like to begin with weather from around the world, and we always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 51 degrees. And we're slated to be about the same as we were yesterday, which was, well, about 87 to 90 degrees. Oh my God, that seems hot. Okay, well, winds are light and variable, and they will remain so. Right now they're out of the southwest. Later on this evening, they will move out of the west at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And we'll have a low of 54 then, okay, which means probably 60 where I'm at. Which means the windows will be open and the air better be fresh. Because right now I don't have any data. Come on, person there in the local area, get that air quality gradient back working, please. The daytime UV is going to be high at 7, so yeah, I always wear a hat. We have high pressure, which is holding steady at 29.99 inches. Visibility is at 9 miles, and humidity is 73%. I will say, it was quite humid, muggy almost last night. And we do have rain in the forecast. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday looks like we're slated to get almost an inch of rain in 3 days. Okay, that's fine. I still like minerals from the sky. Feeding my garden. It's always better. Okay. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people live around the world. That's right. A lot of peas to pop, and I try to pop a few. London is 57 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 62 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 76 and sunny. Kiev is 71 and fair. Kabul is 66 and fair. Hong Kong is 70 and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 65 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 65 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 50 degrees and cloudy. And New York, New York is 57 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy, and you do have a wind advisory for small craft. Take care if you're out there sailing on Hudson Bay or wherever, even on the river. Take care. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these personal purchased weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people live around the world. First offering here at the Chef's Table and West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, is an article out of Think Progress by Natasha Geeling. Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt is expected to announce a proposed rule that would severely limit the kinds of science that could be used in the agency's rulemaking process. The changes, which would ban the use of any underlying data that is not available publicly, has been previously proposed by conservative lawmakers like Representative Lamar Smith and champions of deregulation like Stephen Malloy, a former consultant for the tobacco industry who has argued that air pollution is not a public health threat. You know, I unfortunately had to work with people who smoked. And I worked with a plumber who literally believed that the filter in his cigarette would filter out noxious fumes when he was in confined tight spaces welding or using glue. Yeah, he believed that. Okay. New standards could also have the unintended consequence of limiting the kind of industry data that the EPA can use in its rulemaking process, making it more difficult for Pruitt and his political appointees to rubber stamp rules favorable to industry. Wait till they find out about this. Scientists fear that Pruitt's new science standards will severely limit the kinds of public health studies that the agency can use when considering new rules, because many large-scale public health studies rely on anonymous data. That data is, by law, kept anonymous due to patient privacy policies, though the studies are still subject to the same kinds of peer review process as studies that use publicly available data. Limiting public health data could be a double-edged sword for Pruitt and his political allies, however, because it could ban the use of data that could be favorable to industry. The thing about the health data is that it works both ways. Andrew Rosenberg, director of the Union for Concerned Scientists, Center for Science and Democracy, told Think Progress, health data can show that something does have an impact, and it can also show that something does not have an impact. Yeah, but when you're a political appointee whose task is to really deconstruct the administrative state, do you really want balance in your data? Do you really want to leave it up to chance? Don't you want some certainty in your science? Don't you? Don't you want a self-fulfilling prophecy? Because that's the only way you can exist. So therefore you set it up so that the outcome will be what you prefer it to be. Well, limiting the kind of science that the EPA can use to only publicly available data won't just impact public health studies. It will also potentially have a chilling effect on the kind of data that industry is willing to submit to the agency for rulemaking. That implication has already spooked some political appointees within the agency who have internally expressed concern about how industry might respond to the changes. What? Okay, according to a report published last week by Politico, Nancy Beck, Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention, and a former staffer for the American Chemistry Council, the chemical industry's main trade association, raised concerns as far back as January of this year that the new requirements would impose serious burdens on the chemical industry. Uh-oh. You're trying to keep those damned egghead scientists in check because they're obviously all liberals. Because they keep coming up with this stuff that says air pollution can kill you. When we know plumbers who smoke cigarettes so that air pollution won't kill you, just make more people smoke cigarettes. That way the filter on the cigarettes will filter out all the noxious fumes outside the cigarette. Trap them right there in that filter. We'll make the filter out of asbestos so that way it won't catch on fire, okay? All right. The directive needs to be revised, she wrote, explaining that pesticide registrations require a huge amount of data to be submitted to the agency and that requiring that data be publicly available would be incredibly burdensome and not practical. Pruitt doesn't care about practical. He has, this phone booth, they keep talking about this private phone booth, the code of silence. I don't think people understand what that really is. This guy is one of these wacko white evangelists who believes that everything he does is directed by God, and God speaks to him personally, and not through inference, not through a sign, but actual words tells him what to do. And that private phone booth, that code of silence, that's his little cubicle where he's talking to God directly, because he's that kind of man on earth, isn't he? Okay. Does requiring publicly available data mean that companies will be forced to make their accounting and bookkeeping public for cost-benefit analyses conducted by the agency? And if companies are reluctant or unwilling to make that information available, will that mean the agency is unable to conduct a cost-benefit analysis, potentially undermining a regulation's chance of surviving scrutiny by a court? This whole thing makes very little sense from an industry standpoint and from a public health standpoint. That's from USC's Rosenberg. It's unclear what the final proposed rule will look like, and it's possible that it will include a special kind of carve-out for confidential business information, but including such an exemption could open the rule up to legal challenges, allowing critics to argue that letting companies keep their data private while forcing public health studies to publish anonymous data qualifies as arbitrary and capricious and therefore violates the Administrative Procedures Act. But Pruitt is there to deconstruct the Administrative Procedures Act because that's part of the administrative state. Vlad doesn't like it. He needs it brought down. Public health? Are you kidding me? You want the public healthy? You need people dead. Okay. We believe the whole argument is nonsense. They are making this big argument about how you should show all your raw data and analysis, but where is the analysis that any of this is necessary?
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
All right. Last offering here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Travis Geddes out of Raw Story. Have you ever noticed that whenever the charge of white nationalism, that we should be standing up against white nationalism, that white conservatives immediately start whining, but we're not white nationalists? And I always say, well, no one said you were. Why are you saying that you are? Well, at least 6 lawyers have demanded refunds of their dues after the Oregon State Bar issued statements condemning the rise of white nationalism under Donald Trump. In his latest bulletin, the State Bar condemned speech that incites violence, and non-bar specialty groups denounced the normalization of hate-mongering since Trump's election. Now, the bar stands by its own statement, but issued a partial refund in response to the statement that was not approved by State Bar leadership. Well, let's see. Lawyer Diane Gruber complained the statements were blatantly partisan and a clear violation of the Supreme Court ruling that found the attorneys had a First Amendment right to refrain from subsidizing political activities by state bar associations. Yes, standing up against white nationalism and the Nazis is taking a partisan stand. Well, indeed it is. So, okay. The Multnomah Republican Party, which threatened to hire right-wing fringe groups to provide security at its political events, also demanded the state bar cease its partisan attacks against Trump. Well, tell Trump to stop his partisan attacks against the rule of law and our representative democratic republic, because, damn it, we have to, don't we? All right. That brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But Netroots Radio broadcasts on. Stay tuned for breaking news as it happens throughout the day. And so we will meet up with you tomorrow, of course. And as breaking news breaks on Netroots Radio, if anything really big happens, the bad thing, we will break in live and have a very extensive panel break it down for you. So stay tuned to that. And we will visit with you tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Cohen. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.